So welcome to lecture number 2 in our unit on classification and evolution. Hopefully you didn't mind our first lecture too much and you got to watch it and you did some of the activities, at least started some of the activities that we did in class. But today we're going to move on to domains and kingdoms. So as a review, we've talked about prokaryotes and eukaryotes, and we're learning about cell structure, and the main difference between the two, really the only difference between the two, is that your prokaryotes, they're very primitive. They don't have a defined nucleus, and they don't have membrane-bound organelles. However, your eukaryotes, things like us, plants, fungi, protists, even some protists, they have the membrane-bound organelles, so like chloroplast, mitochondria, endoplasmic reticulum, and we also have a very well-defined nucleus. Keep those in mind. Oh, and we have a little video. Maybe we don't have a video. Anyway, so when it comes to the 3-domain system, due to DNA analysis, because now our technology is so much better, we're able to look at our DNA sequences, we actually found out, hey, what we thought was just like, okay, you're just a bunch of prokaryotes, you don't have a nucleus, you have no membrane-bound organelles. We actually found out, you know what, there's actually a difference between some of our prokaryotic groups. They're not as closely related as we thought they were. So that's how we came up with the 3-domain system. Domains, much larger than your kingdoms, actually more inclusive. So like here I have this little diagram where traditionally for a very, very long time it was a 5-kingdom system, which we're going to get into next, where you had Monera, Protista, Plantae, Fungi, and Animalia. Eventually we did divide the bacteria and archaea into the 2 separate kingdoms, which also helped us lead up to the 3-domain system, where you have the bacteria and archaea as 2 separate domains, and then all of your eukaryotes fall under the domain eukarya. Go figure. But to kind of go over the 3-domain system, your 3 domains are archaea, mostly unicellular, prokaryotic, and these are typically your extremophiles. So these are all your organisms that live in very extreme environments, whether it be really, really hot or really, really cold, or maybe there is a certain chemical, like your deep sea vents in the ocean. Those are a lot of extremophiles. Also, have you ever gone to like, I want to say Yosemite? There's some pretty cool pictures if you look online. Some extremophiles that live near the geysers, they tend to make the area look very colorful. So I don't know, something I've seen around. Bacteria, these are also unicellular, prokaryotic. These are just like your normal bacteria, if bacteria can be considered normal. And then eukarya, all your eukaryotes, all your organisms that actually have a nucleus. And if like you look at our phylogenetic tree of life, you're going to hear that time and time again through this classification unit. You have your bacteria, which you can go into gram-positives, gram-negatives, which luckily we're not going to get into. But if you ever take like AP Bio or like college level bio, you'll definitely talk about gram-positive and negatives. We have spirochetes, cyanobacteria, which is considered the most primitive life form. When you go into archaea, you have your halophiles, which those are your like very, very salt environments, so like deep sea vents. Methanobacteria, bacteria that really like methane. And if you know what methane is, bonus points. And then eukaryota, that's plants, animals, fungus, ciliates, flagellates, all those good things that have a nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. But 6-kingdom system, as I said, that's the system that most people are familiar with, because the 3 domains is still fairly new. But Archaeobacteria, still underneath the domain Archaea. Oh, and if you remember the last lecture when we talked about our different prefixes, Archaea typically primitive, old. So these are the older bacteria. And they live in extreme environments like deep sea vents. This is what I was talking about with the geysers, how you see that like orangey, brown and reds, caused by bacteria. Then we have Eubacteria, sometimes considered the newer bacteria. These are typically the ones that make you sick, like Streptococcus, E. coli, no bueno. And these are actually pictures of Streptococcus. Typically, there's little balls, and then E. coli. Like there's different shapes that are associated with certain bacteria, which if we had more time, we'd definitely go over, but we got to prepare for the end, of course. But, as I was saying, definitely there is an older way, where we had 5 kingdoms. We just kind of grouped all bacteria together in a kingdom called Monera. But then we realized, hey, guess what? They're not as closely related as we thought they were. We need to divvy it up some more. But when you keep going on through our different kingdoms, our 6 kingdoms, we have the kingdom Protista. These are all your protists. These eukaryotes are typically, they can be multicellular or they can be unicellular. So like someone who shall not be named likes to talk about brain-eating amoeba. That would be considered a protist. They don't really have the complex organ systems, and typically you can find them in moist environments like water, aquatic environments. So the example I gave, amoeba, paramecium, where they're not like true, like, they don't have hands and feet, but they do have things called pseudopods. If you were to break down that word pseudopod, pseudo meaning like fake, pod, foot, so like a fake foot, kind of cool. Fungi, kingdom fungi. So all you mushroom fans, I actually like eating mushrooms. I think they're delicious. If you hate on mushrooms, I don't know what's wrong with you. But Earth's decomposers, they do a lot of decomposing. When we go back to our whole how in ecosystem you have decomposers and producers and whatnot, fungi are typically your decomposers. Once again, they're eukaryotes. They can be either unicellular or multicellular, but they obtain their food by absorption. They absorb all those nutrients that have been that they get from all those things that have been decomposing. So, like if you ever look in a forest, cow dung, sometimes manure, you can find fungi in there too. But because they obtain food from something else, they are considered heterotrophs. See, we're revisiting all these terms. You guys are like, oh, I'm never going to learn this again. I'm never going to need this again. Ha! Kingdom Plantae. So we have Earth's multicellular oxygen producers. Where would we be without plants? Dead. But plants, eukaryotes, they carry out photosynthesis, hence why they produce their own food, and that makes them autotrophs. Stationary. Unless apparently you live in Middle Earth and you're hanging out with ants, plants don't move. They don't walk around. They stay pretty still. But if you remember the thing with the difference between animals and plant cells have cell walls, which gives them their very rigid structure. And that rigid structure is what prevents them from moving around. And also those cell walls made of cellulose, which is a type of carbohydrate. And then, last but not least, we come to kingdom Animalia. So, multicellular, we're consumers, we're eukaryotes, and our cells don't have a cell wall because we need to move around. And that's a cute little penguin right there, he's hanging out with his mom penguin. But, to kind of wrap up this piece on the different kingdoms. So there's this kind of like subdivision of classification we call systematics, which we're analyzing the diversity of organisms. So you have all these different organisms. Like seriously, when you try and think about how many organisms that even currently exist on Earth, kind of mind-boggling. So there's actually scientists who go about and try and figure out all these different relationships, their natural relationships. And when we do this, there are certain things that scientists consider. For instance, we like to look at fossils. So look at, okay, like, hey, here's a fossil, there's a fossil. Do we see any comparisons? We also look at homologous features. And see, there's that prefix homo again. So like homo, same. Homologous features, we're looking for those features that are very similar. So like typically, and it seems to be the same picture in every single bio book. When you see homologous features, it's like when we were comparing human, cat, whale, and bat. All mammals, we're all in the class Mammalia, but we have these similar features. In the human, it's the forearm. In the cat, it's like your paws, your legs. In the whale, it's its flipper, fin, and then in the bat, you have its wing. Granted, we all have different, what am I looking for, genuses maybe? I don't know. It's a long day. But as you can see, there's certain parts of that structure that are very similar. That forearm section here. Same bone, but just different organisms. Embryos. So sometimes scientists even look at the embryological development, try and say that 10 times fast, of organisms. So it's just how they develop over time, like when they're in the case of humans, it'd be like when they're in the womb, and do all mammals go through the same similar embryological development? That's one example. Chromosomes. Seriously, technology, chromosomes, protein, DNA sequences, all those things, that really made looking at all these relationships a lot easier, because now we can really go to the nitty-gritty, as opposed to, remember when we had Aristotle, who was just like, oh, animal, plant, you can fly, you can't, etc. So like with protein and DNA sequences, like we have aster, tomato, snapdragon, and rice. All different plants. They're all petal forming. But when we look at our sequences, we can see that they all have basically the same sequence, except for where you see in yellow, those are the differences. And then furthermore, because we have all these natural relationships that we try to make, we end up coming up with these diagrams called phylogenetic trees. It basically displays how closely related certain groups of organisms are. So in the case of placental mammals, humans are placental mammals. Like if you've ever heard of placenta when like giving birth, we'll get into that, hopefully. I don't know if you're looking forward to that. When we talk about the placenta during reproduction and whatnot, placental mammals, we're placental mammals, but there's also other placental mammals. So we have aardvarks, are placental mammals, anteaters, armadillos, and sloths, primates, rodents, pangolins, carnivores like bears, and all your dactyl animals, so like zebras, caribou, moose. But here we have all these placental mammals. If you're looking at a phylogenetic tree, like, okay, we're here, then we diverge into two parts. But like, if I'm looking across my whole entire tree, I can make the assumption, like, let's say I'm comparing bears and Proboscidae, which are your elephants. They don't seem to be that closely related. However, if I were to look at maybe my, well, that would be a really easy one. Like, let's look at my primates and my carnivores, a bit more closely related, because if you follow the branches on the tree, this at least has a common ancestor that goes back here before they split up into these several groups. But if I'm looking over here, it's like I'm going all the way back here to find that common ancestor with the carnivores. And this is something we'll definitely see again when we start talking. Actually, I lied. But this is something that we might revisit when we talk about evolution, because I might have a couple of trees that I'll be showing you. And then to, once again, kind of hammer home that whole evidence of shared ancestry, homologous features and a lot of the similarities in embryological development provide information about that common ancestry. Like, once again, like, this is that same picture, but blown up. You have same structure. This highlighted structure is the same bone in all these different species. But we all have, like, the bat, whale, cat, and human. that structure overall might be used for different purposes, but ultimately it's that same bone. And if you're kind of interested in how cladistics, which is something else, cladograms is another term for the phylogenetic trees sometimes. But if you're interested in how the classification, how you have these phylogenetic trees, a site that you'd want to check out is the Tree of Life, and it's actually been a project they've been doing for a while, where they kind of show you all the connections between all these different organisms and taxa. But the website for that is tolweb.org/tree. And next time we'll be talking about the origins of life. So hopefully you've been getting all your classification stuff done, and I will see you next time. Have a good night.